moments when royal guards put humanity before protocol, the wall of iron discipline, in the ancient kingdom of Revan, nestled between the Kalsar Mountains and the Vera River. The royal palace stood not just as a home for kings, but as a symbol of order itself. Its walls had stood for 300 years, and in those 300 years, not once had its gates opened without permission after sundown. The guards who protected those walls were not ordinary soldiers. They were chosen from childhood, trained in the Academy of Sentinels, where the first lesson every cadet learned was carved into stone above the training hall's entrance. A guard who bends the rule for mercy today will bend it for a bribe tomorrow. Protocol is the only wall that never falls. For 20 years, no guard had embodied this teaching more perfectly than Captain Aram. Orphaned as a child during the border wars, Arham had been raised within the academy itself. He had no family waiting for him beyond the barracks, no home except the palace grounds. Discipline was not just his profession, it was the only love he had ever known. His fellow guards respected him, but few were close to him. He rarely laughed. He rarely rested. When younger recruits asked him why he never took leave to visit family, he would simply say, "This palace is my family. Its walls are my blood." Beside him always stood Salim, a guard 10 years younger, who had joined the academy after Aram himself had saved him from a burning grain house as a boy. Salim adored his captain, though he sometimes wondered, quietly, never aloud, whether Arham had a heart buried somewhere beneath all that iron discipline. The storm it was the 17th night of the monsoon, and the storm that year was the worst Revan had seen in a decade. Rivers overflowed. Roads turned to mud rivers of their own. In the city below the palace, homes flooded, and the local healer's modest clinic ran out of both medicine and patients. Inside the palace, the guards stood their posts as always, rain hammering against their armor, torches struggling to stay lit in the wind. Arham walked his usual patrol along the outer gate, his cloak soaked through, his expression unreadable as ever. It was near midnight when they heard it. A woman's voice, desperate and breaking, carried on the wind. "Please, somebody, please help me." Salim was the first to react, rushing to the gate's small viewing slot. Through the rain, he saw her, a woman on her knees in the mud, cradling a small boy in her arms. The boy's lips had a faint blue tinge, his small chest rising and falling in short, panicked bursts. "Captain," Salim called. "There's a woman, a child." Aram arrived at the gate within seconds. Through the slot, he studied the scene with the same composure he brought to every threat assessment. But something in him, something he could not name, tightened at the sight of the child's trembling hands. "State your business," Arham called out, his voice carrying the practiced flatness of 1,000 nights like this one. "My son," the woman cried. "He has fever sickness, the kind that takes children in a single night. The city healer said his medicines were ruined in the flood. Please, I beg you, I know the royal physician lives within these walls. Just let him look at my boy just once, that is all I ask." Arham's jaw tightened. He knew the law. Every guard knew the law. The palace gates did not open after dark for any commoner, under any circumstance, regardless of the reason given. It had been this way since the siege of 9 Nights 200 years earlier, when an enemy spy had used a dying beggar's cries to trick a young guard into opening the gates, and half the royal family had been slaughtered before dawn. "I cannot open this gate," Aram said, though his voice had lost some of its usual certainty. "There is a physician's house 2 streets from the market square. Go there. I already went." The woman screamed, her voice cracking with anguish. "He is not home. He went to the flooded district to help others." "There is no one else." "My son is dying in my arms, and you are hiding behind stone and law." Salim glanced at his captain. In 15 years of service, he had never seen Aram hesitate. But he was hesitating now. The child let out a weak, rattling cough. His mother pressed her lips to his forehead and began to sob uncontrollably, rocking him back and forth in the mud and the rain. The choice Aram closed his eyes for a single moment. In that moment, memories he had buried for decades surfaced unbidden. Himself, as a small boy, coughing through fever in a refugee camp during the border wars, no physician for miles, his own mother's arms the only shelter he had. He remembered surviving that night only because a stranger, a passing soldier, had broken his own orders to carry him to safety. He had never told anyone that story. Not even Salim. "Captain," Salim asked quietly. What are your orders? Aram opened his eyes. Something in them had changed. Open the gate, he said. Salim froze. Captain, the law states... I know what the law states, Aram said, his voice steady now, resolute. I have recited it 1,000 times. Tonight I choose to answer to something older than the law. He unbolted the heavy iron latch himself, his hand steady despite the storm, and pulled the gate open just enough to let the woman and her son through. He then knelt, an act no one had ever seen. The Iron Captain performed for a commoner, and gently lifted the boy from his mother's exhausted arms. Follow me, quickly. Carried the child himself through the palace corridors, past startled servants and wide-eyed night guards, straight to the chambers of Ustad Bahar Ali, the royal physician, who was roused from sleep by Salim's urgent knocking. Bahar Ali took one look at the boy and his expression turned grave. Fever fire, it's advanced. Another hour and his lungs would have failed entirely. He immediately called for herbs, cool cloths, and a rare medicine ground from mountain roots, kept specifically for the royal family's use. For the rest of the night, Aram did not leave the room. He stood in the corner, silent, watching as Bahar Ali worked. Salim stood beside him, equally silent, understanding without words that his captain needed no questions right now. Only quiet company. By the first light of dawn, the boy's fever broke. His small chest rose and fell in slow, even breaths. His mother wept again, this time from relief, not despair. She turned to Aram, taking both his hands in hers. You do not know what you have done for me tonight. You had every reason to leave us in that storm, and you chose not to. Aram looked down at the sleeping child. A wall protects nothing, he said quietly, if it forgets what it was built to protect. The price of compassion, news of what had happened, traveled fast. First through whispered conversations among the servants, then to the ears of court officials, and finally, inevitably, to Nasir Khan, the Sultan's Grand Vizier. Nasir Khan had despised Arham for years, not for any personal wrong, but for the simple fact that Arham's unwavering discipline made Nasir's own corruption harder to hide. A captain who followed every rule to the letter was a captain who could not be bribed, threatened, or manipulated. Nasir had long wished for an excuse to remove him. Now at last he had one. By midday, Nasir stood before Sultan Faizaluddin in the Grand Court, flanked by 2 junior officials eager to please him. Your Majesty, Nasir began, his tone dripping with practiced concern. I bring troubling news. Last night, Captain Arham broke the sacred law of the 9 nights. He opened the palace gates after dark for a common woman and her child, in direct violation of 2 centuries of protocol. If such disobedience goes unpunished, what is to stop the next guard from opening these gates for an assassin dressed as a beggar? I ask that the captain be stripped of his rank as precedent demands, the court murmured. Many of the older nobles nodded gravely. The siege of 9 nights was not forgotten in Revan, and the law existed for good reason. The Sultan's face remained unreadable. Summon Captain Aram, he said. The court's judgment. Aram entered the grand hall still in his rain-worn uniform, having not slept since the previous night. He walked to the center of the court and bowed deeply before the throne. Captain Aram, the Sultan said, the Grand Vizier accuses you of breaking the law of the 9 nights. Do you deny this? I do not deny it, Your Majesty, Arham said clearly, his voice carrying through the silent hall. I opened the gate for a dying child and his mother. I take full responsibility for that choice. Nasir Khan smiled thinly. A confession, Your Majesty. As I said, let him finish, the Sultan said sharply, silencing the vizier. Arham continued. I have served this palace for 20 years, Your Majesty. In that time I have followed every law, obeyed every order, and asked no questions of protocol, no matter how difficult. But last night I looked through that gate and saw a child dying in the rain, a child no different from what I myself once was, saved only because a stranger once broke the rules for me. I chose to be that stranger for someone else. If that is a crime, I will accept whatever punishment this court decides. But I will not pretend I regret it, because I do not. The hall fell into complete silence. Even Nasir Khan's confident smile faltered slightly. The Sultan studied his captain for a long moment. Then he rose from his throne and stepped down toward Arham, an action that shocked the entire court. for the Sultan rarely left his seat during judgment. "Tell me, Captain," the Sultan said quietly, though his voice carried to every corner of the silent hall. "If that same night came again, the same storm, the same choice, would you do it again every single time?" "Your Majesty," Aram answered without hesitation,